So thanks so much, everyone, for joining me today for this webinar. And the topic is mastering user research from online to in-person UXR. And today I'm going to be talking about user research. I'm Frank Spillers. I'm the founder and CEO of Experience Dynamics and Chief Experience Officer. I lead UX consulting projects with Experience Dynamics. I'm also teaching with the Interaction Design Foundation and my own community. It's called UX Inner Circle. So thanks again for joining me. And this topic, I think, for me is one of my favorite topics with user experience. And the reason is because it's where all the very interesting stuff comes from. When you're doing UX design, all your great ideas and all your great empathy, all your great insights come from user experience research. So I'm going to spend some time talking about why user research is so important. If you already know that it's important, then this maybe can be an opportunity for you to polish, to fine-tune your ability to communicate that to other people. Because I think getting other people in your organization, stakeholders, comfortable with the idea of user research is like as important as being passionate or being so excited about user research. And so like I like to say, you have to be able to sell user research in your organization. And then we'll end up by talking about scaling user research for pandemic times, for doing online, and then maybe also in-person user research if that's something that you're doing or can do. So let's get into, welcome those of you joining. Let's get into why user research. It's interesting that when I talk to teams, they usually talk about this as UX UI or UI UX. And I think it's interesting to note that the language kind of tells me at least who I'm dealing with. The people that say UX UI, that put UX first, in other words, in the language, tend to be more interested in what problem are we trying to solve, and what is the user's pain point. The teams, the folks that talk to me about UI UX, when they refer to this business problem of UI UX, it tells me that the driver is the tactical user interface. It's the actual design changes. So I think it's interesting that the language in particular is interesting. To be clear, UI is at the very kind of bottom level. It's at that kind of button level, where you're at the kind of grounded level, where UX is a much wider term that's communicating something, it's involving the user's total experience, their journey, their emotions, the problems they're trying to solve. Of course, it involves an interface, but these days it might involve many interfaces, multi-channel, cross-channel, omni-channel. So the real key isn't UI UX or UX UI, and a lot of people even get angry. I've seen people on LinkedIn getting angry with just using the term UI UX or UX UI. For me, it really doesn't matter. The thing that matters most is that you're doing quality UX work, and that you understand that UX is a much higher level kind of concept that we're all using in the industry, and UI, it refers to the end result. So the thing that you get out of it, the button, the link, the design, if you will, the user interface. Today we're talking about user research or user experience research, so-called UXR, which is kind of a newer term for this job title or this area. And as if we need another acronym, right? Now, UXR, in this conversation about UX and UI, I remember I said that UI is at the button level. It's kind of down there, kind of on the very lower sort of, if you zoom right down into the details of, so something happens, it's like a detail in this process. Because, who cares about a button if the button is not, relevant to the user and their task and their goal. There's also, we should add to this, the term user experience design or UX design. UXD isn't really, okay, it's another acronym, but basically UX design. And really we should call it, or call out, interaction design, right? So that in between, like how you design a UI is you use, interaction design, or so-called UX design. The term UX design is just so broad, it's not specific enough. So you have people doing research, or you have people doing UX, and they're doing it, as if, as if it's just one broad thing, as if it's just something that covers everything. So I think being clear about the terms is really important. But the main thing is that I'd like to point out is that user experience research sits above the interaction design or the UX design phase, and the UI down below, and also the way you think about it in your mind, or the way your team or the way your manager thinks about this when they ask you to design this thing, that in order to define a UI, right? In order to get a UI, you have to do interaction design. In order to do interaction design, you have to do user research. And in order to get a good user experience, it has to come from user research, interaction design, and then finally the UI. And for some people, there's also visual design. Notice I'm not even introducing visual design. Visual design sits over there on that level, I think, somewhere to the right of interaction design, in the sense that many teams use visual design as a replacement for interaction design. Many UX designers are considered to be basically just visual designers, or people that produce, the assets of a visual or graphic design. And that's wrong, of course, because it's not, UX design is not visual design. Visual design is visual design. It's beauty in its own right, but first there has to be the planning, the careful planning of interaction design based on user research, which will define the user experience. Okay, so just to be clear on terms, and just to be clear on where user experience research fits into this. UXR studies humans in context. Can you imagine designing something for an astronaut without considering the context of outer space and microgravity? Can you imagine even doing that? It would be reckless and irresponsible. You would have a dead user, right? You can't imagine that. And that's why when astronauts test their UIs, they test them in microgravity. The best we can get to microgravity on Earth is a swimming pool, or is underwater. And so if you're designing for an astronaut, it's important that you look at things in the context, how the UI is going to be used. In other words, you're floating around, you're having to go from here to there, you're doing it, you're using the tool or pushing the button with that environmental constraint. So, designing for astronauts is taken very seriously. So, if you could put your microphones to mute. Hi, could you put your microphone to mute for me, please? Thank you. Okay, so designing for astronauts. Now with user experience research, we have user testing and contextual research. Two sides to this. And actually, while we're getting people to mute their mics, let me give you a poll. What is your job title now?
Hello, Frank. Can you mute all from your
Yeah,
host?
I can't very easily. So let me see if I can go try doing that. Just a moment. All right. So So there's a poll there, and it looks like designer is 88% and researcher is 8%. Okay, so welcome to the researchers, and developer 4%. This is on the live. If you're watching this later, Zoom does not think it's important to show the poll on a recording, so you won't be seeing this. Speaking of Zoom and contextual, so we were just having some issues there muting people, and so this is a very good demonstration of, you know, in context, the context being a live event, right? And where's the control, right? So where's the control to do that? I looked in the settings, I looked in the desktop app, I looked in the control panel, I looked in all the obvious places. I really don't know, still don't know how to do it. So hopefully we have the burden on the users, people attending this live, to do that. Okay, so there are two sides to user experience research, and it's so important to recognize this. The reason is because too many people are just talking about user testing when they talk about UXR, user research. So user research is often considered user testing, but it's only one side. It's important that there's the other side. There's two sides to user research, UXR, and context research. Let's just call it context research, is even more important than user testing, right? User testing is often when it's too late or at the end, or it doesn't matter, or you're just testing the UI, but you're not testing the higher level, context of the motivations and the behavior and so forth. So we call these things ethnography, diary studies, just user interviews. Let's not get too complicated. There are lots of kind of methods, but let's just call them user interviews and observations. Context research digs into user goals. So what's the priority, right? And I've also added you can Google this to learn more. This you can tie this objective of goal, searching for user goals to goal-directed design. Okay, so we also look at place, the environment. Like we were saying, if you're designing for astronauts, you should really be thinking about the design and evaluating it in the context of the underwater world, or when it actually goes into space. At that point, it's probably too late, right? So that's why you see a lot of testing with, and the point of the astronaut swimming pool thing is sometimes we can't get into our users' environment, especially with COVID, or so I'm going to share with you a technique that would talk more about the diary study. Because with COVID and online research, you can scale your user research insights with diary studies. And you can get a little bit closer into that observation of the user's environment. So welcome those of you joining us on the live. And if you're watching this recorded, thanks for tuning in. Activity-centered design is where this, the activity, where's this taking place? And this is very, very important, because where something takes place or when it takes place is as important as what it is. So when we design UIs, we usually just look at what the UI is that needs to be designed. We don't think about under what conditions, underwater or on a live presentation, when you really just don't have, time to, you need the control immediately. And I see a mute button, and we had a problem a minute ago with people not muting their mics, and oh, there it is again. And so contextual controls is what we mean when we translate this from UI to understanding context and building a task. Then we talk about contextually relevant UI controls. The task is another focus of context research, and we're trying to understand the typical behaviors or expectations of the user, their habits, what they're trying to do. And this you could tie to scenario-based design. Scenario-based design, the entire book on that topic, also called task-oriented design or task-centered design. And you can get a free ebook on that topic as well if you Google task-oriented design. Ultimately, we're trying to figure out the user's behaviors, so what's driving or the motivation of the goal or the task, right? And you could tie this to motivational design as an area, or motivational UX. You can Google that as well. So you can Google all those things. You can see there's actually been some thinking behind each of those areas. But the important thing is that we understand our users' goals, the environment, the tasks and behavior that they're doing. And this is what goes into our strategy, our interaction design.
So Frank, you can find the link to how to mute all in the chat.
Okay, yes, I see. Actually, you know what? I just found it's a 1-by-1, so I can go and 1-by-1 mute someone. So I just discovered there's a mic, and so I'm going to mute a few people here. I think some new people coming in maybe. Welcome and thank you for joining. And if you're watching this on a recording, thanks for hanging in. Now, there was a startup some years ago that in America that it was a banking startup, and it disrupted the entire industry. And this is what one of the senior designers said. He said that we created trust with emotionally intelligent design. And you can see I've highlighted some of the keywords there: goals, priority order, right? The priority order of where the UI goes, what activities, right, that the UI is solving. This design, this is from Jason Putorti, who is the original Mint.com lead designer. And Mint.com actually disrupted the industry of finance, or what we call fintech or personal banking. And their biggest competitor actually bought them. So they're now owned by Intuit, their biggest competitor. So for you, your emotional designer EQ, if you will, or DEQ, is to understand your users, is to deeply understand them, and to understand their desires, or what we call desirability, right? So UX has two sides. It has usability, and that's where user testing comes in. And then it has desirability, and that's the other side of UX, or the sister side of UX. Just like there are two sides to user research, there's testing and field studies. There are two sides to UX, and that's why you need testing to assess usability, and you need context research to determine or discover desirability, right? So desirability, very, very important, and it's one of the things that I'm focusing on in this webinar, because a lot of people think that user testing is just, or that user research, sorry, is just user testing, that we're talking about user testing. And it drives me crazy because so many even very large organizations, very large companies are thinking that as well. Desirability is actually where the party is. And there's a famous Don Norman quote from many years ago, the grandfather of human-centered design. He said that usability is the easy part. It's desirability that really matters, right? And why is it that way? Because remember, as I said, you need to understand what users want, their needs, before you get to interaction design, before you get to UI, right? So it's a much higher level. So let's examine actually some overreactions in the UX community. To learn about the importance of UX research, we can look at what I consider to be overreactions. Personas are garbage, right? I don't know how many attempts there have been to smear personas or dirty personas, and it's just like it seems to be just as important of a topic to the UX community to throw personas down the well than it is to to actually communicate how to use them correctly. And so you'll see there's a lot of articles like this one, personas are garbage. And then you'll see this article, this second one is one that I wrote. And the key there is it's not just that personas are garbage, but they're garbage without good user research. And by good user research, I'm talking about context research, because that's where you develop personas. They're not a user testing process. That's not, they don't go together. Forrester Research did a study and found that with redesigns, you can get a 4 times return on investment from personas, 4 times. That doesn't seem like garbage to me. We should say that properly using personas, can get you 4 times return on investment. And actually, to be clear and to be fair to Forrester, they have been consistent. They've been one of the few voices in the UX community that's been consistent throughout. That has been consistent throughout to tell us that, that this technique is widely misunderstood. I mean, think about designing something for a sewing machine. I remember when I first tried to use a sewing machine, I didn't know what to do. My daughter asked for a sewing machine once for Christmas, and so I bought her a sewing machine. She wanted to make her own clothes, and then she didn't use it. Actually, the sewing machine was, I don't think it was even opened. It didn't get used because she didn't know what to do. So I think personas are similar. They're a technique, but they're a tool. But if you don't know how to use them, of course they're going to be garbage, So it's to me, the issue is the correct use of personas, right? And if you want to follow up on this, I would suggest you check out my blog post. It's called 5 Persona Distinctions: How to Use Personas Properly. So check that out as a follow-up. All right, and all right, there we go. So, all right, empathy. All right, so the other debate in the UX community is about empathy, and it seems to be constantly, like, people are fighting about this. Like on LinkedIn, there are many conversations or blogs. People just seem to like to fight. There are people that think empathy is valuable to design, people that think empathy is not valuable to design. And let me ask you before we move on, do you use personas while we think about empathy? And the poll question is a yes or no question, or not applicable because you're not doing user research. Also, if you would like to add a question on the chat, if you're watching this live and you have the chance to chat, feel free to put a question on the chat so we can take that in the Q&A, question and answer session. So the question is, are you using personas? A lot of people tie personas to empathy, right? That with personas you have empathy. We even use a face, face of an actual human being, and the only reason we do that is to try and generate empathy, right? Your faces or the stock art that you use I think it should be realistic, not just someone like goofy, not silly. But realistic to the type of user. It should also be inclusive, so not, so many races represented, to remember to be inclusive, and hopefully realistic. I like to use stock art that captures the thing that the person is doing. So if it's someone that's with a sewing machine, I might show a person with a sewing machine, for example. All right, and looks like the poll is 55% yes, 23% no, and 23% not applicable, right? And I'll share those there with you. And so it looks like a little over half of the people using personas. All right, so let's talk a little bit about empathy and this debate, right? So why empathy is the start in design thinking. Now, I changed the color of the screen there to orange as a way to think that if I don't think that you're looking at a dark screen, and then all of a sudden I give you a bright orange screen with white text, the contrast just dropped. So if you have low vision, it's an accessibility issue. It's going to be harder for you to read this. It's also a little bright. We went from a dark kind of muted theme to this like bright. So visual designers, good visual designers understand this, right? They have empathy when it comes to colors. But right, if I didn't have that same empathy, you would have all kinds of colors. And you see websites sometimes taking the rainbow approach with like, green over here, red over here, blue over here, and so forth and so on. It's the starting point to design thinking. So let's go back to the muted theme. Don Norman said it's useless. Instead, he said, focus on trying to solve problems. And he says, and this title was, I don't believe in empathic design, okay? Tim Brown, who was a co-founder of IDEO and also the design thinking methodology, they're basically the same thing. Design thinking comes from human-centered design. It basically is human-centered design with a few extra approaches, techniques, and mindsets. But Tim Brown said that empathy is not what we're doing as designers. It's just what we use in order to get to helping us define the problem or solve the problem correctly, right? And I think Tim Brown has it correct. I think Don Norman is missing explanation, which when it puts it on a blog or on social media gets so distorted, and then people are fighting about it. Why do I say that? Is because for the empathy haters, what they really should say, like here's the thing about empathy is it's not optional. You don't like have it or you don't like it or not like it. It's like saying humans aren't real. Like humans are, you can't decide not to be human or non-human. You're human. And you need to have a good user experience with technology and design. That's a requirement. So empathy is built into our brains. What they should have said is it's not empathy, it's the poor use of it. That if you imagined a user's pain or instead of observing it directly, that's really what Norman, I think if we could get him to expand on that, I don't believe in empathy, and all the empathy haters, all the people that fight and say, empathy's garbage. What they really mean is they have a good intention. Their good intention is that that it's being misused, right? And then all of a sudden they've taken the extreme sort of social media, where you just go to the extreme of a viewpoint, and the extreme says, oh, that's just forget about empathy. It's terrible. Our empathy is terrible. No, you can't get away from empathy because it's actually built into our brain. We discovered these mirror neurons. Gillespie actually discovered them. And they're in the front part of your brain, that new part of your brain. They're the same thing that I observed in my 1-year-old daughter. When she was 1 year old, somebody would hurt themselves, another child or even adult would hurt themselves, and she would go, and she would feel this pain. She would feel that like directly. It was like just a straight download, an uncensored download to her mirror neurons. And I saw that was before I knew about the mirror neurons, actually, even though they were first researched in 1999. Well, my daughter was born in that was 1999, actually, when that was happening. So it was early in the, my point of bringing up the research as well is stay current with the science. Don't just just decide that, that's it. This is human behavior and the way things work cognitively. And, if you have an issue about empathy, go back to the science, go back to what we know now, because the field of neuroscience and cognitive science is changing every decade, every 10, 15, 20 years is like being revolutionized. And Matthew Lieberman in his book Social pointed this out with dozens and dozens of his own MRI studies and others. So it's a proven, like if you look in social neuroscience, this field of social neuroscience, it tells us there are two systems, this mirror neuron system and this mentalizing system. You actually need both. Mirror neurons just like alert you that there's pain. Like in other words, that you perceive there's pain. My daughter didn't know what to do with that. So as she grew older, she stopped showing the like crying when she saw somebody crying or hurting when she saw someone hurt. She stopped doing that because her mentalizing system kicked in. And then she's able to say, oh, is this real? Should I, oh, that's a movie or like a character, you know, it's a dog or a mouse or on the TV, or it's another, you know, child in a classroom that's pretending to be in pain. So then she can mentalize and say, oh, it's not appropriate to cry with, you know, that person. The mirror neuron system tells us like what's happening, like, so goal understanding, steps and procedures. Think we could use that in UX in combination with the mentalizing system is context detection, context of use, context and meaning. So anyone who likes murder shows or mysteries or reads books, you know, the whodunit, we call it whodunit, the why questions, anyone that the child that constantly asks why, they're activating their mentalizing system, and you need both, right? Those two things, goals and intention, are very key for us. How, what, why, and then the context, right? In addition, the science shows us that we have this thing, mind reading, that gives us understanding because we can contextualize. Oh, okay, the murder happened like this. Oh, okay. We have something called affect matching, which either helps us help people or avoid situations. And I've seen like this in New York City. I remember there were two businessmen, and there was an African immigrant who had no legs. She was in a manual wheelchair, like, and the elevator was not working. These two men, I was observing from another platform in the subway, these two men, without any prompting, without any asking, they saw she was trying to get up these really long flight of stairs. I mean, they were like 4 flights of stairs. They grabbed her wheelchair and took her up 4 flights of stairs. Like, and it's because of their affect matching. It kicked in, like they didn't even, nothing was said. They just automatically helped. And you see that a lot in actually really big cities like New York City. You'll see, even though these are places that are supposed to not be helpful and so forth and so on, you see almost these paradoxes of intense empathy. And then we have empathic motivation. So our brain mimics, that's what I saw with my daughter. The key is to feel my pain, right? As a user, feel maybe we should say actual pain. And in order to activate this mirror system and mentalizing system, you need user contact. That's why UXR is so important. It's what Genevieve Bell, who is a director of UX and was very influential in her work at Intel, she even helped change their business model dramatically. At one point, their CEO said they're no longer a chip manufacturer, they're an experience company. They're in the experience industry. A lot of it was her work. She called this deep hanging out. In other words, hanging out with the users, right? So that the users are understood, so that you can pick up their pain. So find the pain and then journey map, the pain, right? For example, this is a good example: goals, needs, motivations, behaviors, and pain points. That's a good starting point for mapping data from your personas. You could use an empathy map. Maybe some of you are familiar with that, where you see, hear, feel. It's just another technique. You can Google empathy map to see a template of how to do that. How well you do empathy depends on how often you do it and how well you activate it, right? So it's not whether empathy is real or not real in UX. These are just ridiculous, almost childish conversations that are being had. They're not research-based. They're not based on the actual research. They also miss out the mentalizing system. They also miss the message, which is is just because you have a muscle, you don't argue whether you have a muscle or not. It's either weak or strong. You have a weak muscle, you have a strong muscle. So empathy is like a muscle. It's there. Your mirror neurons are there. Your mentalizing depends, but if you don't use it, if you don't allow your mirror neurons and your mentalizing system, the two aspects of empathy, if you don't allow them to be used, if you don't grab that, if you don't help that user with a disability, that user in the wheelchair that was stuck going up 4 flights, if you don't do that, if you just ignore that and you don't talk to users, then you don't do very good UX. That's what we know. I've been in the field now for almost 25 years, and that's what I've seen firsthand working with hundreds and hundreds of organizations. But it's also what we know in the field of UX management. We know that teams that don't do UXR or don't do UX research don't have that emotional intelligence, right? Emotional intelligence means that your empathy was grounded in real users. So start out with testing with like 7 users next time, maybe not 5, and maybe then add 8, and maybe then 10. This is a recent image actually where I was doing some user testing. The field research we did online, it was the start of the COVID, and we did it with an online diary study and user interviews. So we did Zoom user interviews and then left the users with a 2-week diary. And the diary was exploring aspects of the experience we were trying to get. So, and then we were also testing VR here, you can see with the masks and so forth and so on. With regard to user interviews or diaries, no less than 15 users, right? Never 5. So that's a complete distortion. And not enough people are talking about this. It concerns me because it's just wrong. The 5 magic rule that Jacob Nielsen gave us, 5, 5, 5, it's like the tyranny of the number 5. It only applies to user testing, and it actually only supposed to apply to each segment. So you have new customers, that's 5. You have existing customers, that's 5. Now you're up to 10 users. Then you have maybe a third group that you're trying to reach, that's 15 users for testing. Then you have a fourth group that, so is maybe not realistic to real life. So maybe you just test with 10 and try and fit in, 5 core and then 3 and 2 or something like that. But when it comes to context research, 15 is the minimum and up. We include context research. We include sometimes 30 to 40 users is quite normal. It's an average of between 15 to 30. And the reason is because to do deep hanging out, you need that time. You need more. You're not just testing the UI. Does it work? Does it not work? Work, not work, work, not work, work, not work. The button's there. Can see the button, not see the button, see the button, not see the button. That's user testing. This is more about like understanding the total space. And I only learned to appreciate this. I had a client who didn't really understand qualitative research, and he kept pushing our sample from, we had 40 users, and he forced us to include group interviews with 300 users. And we ended up doing group interviews at like 15 or 20 per group. It was the only way to scale, 300 interviews. But it gave me a very strong, respect for spending a lot of time. I mean, at the end of that field study, I really knew my users so well. I mean, too well. And, the caveat here about interviewing is, unless you're an experienced team or it's an emergency or you're doing a design sprint and you're just trying to inject, then 5, casual. But if you're doing like core product management, UX management, if you're trying to define a UX strategy, you're trying to do proper UX or UX design, you need to do a field study with at least 15 users, at least. And all right, so let's talk about types of user research. Let me ask you before we move on, I'm going to put up a poll here. The poll is, which of the following do you do? User testing, field study, that's like a user interview or a diary study and so forth. Maybe automated user testing tool. Fourth option is phone interview with user, and the fifth option is online survey. If you're watching this later on the recording, I apologize because Zoom doesn't share these live polls. But I'll read it out to you. So which do you do? Which types? And I think only half of our audience does in the live does user research. So of that half, looks like user testing is getting looks like user testing is 46%, field study is 8%, phone interview with user 23%, and online survey 23%. So majority of people, that's probably pretty representative. That's why the message of mastering UXR, user research, has to include this very important conversation about context research, about that other side of user research. It's not just about user testing. User testing is there when it's almost too late. All right, so I'll share the results with the live audience there. And you can see there, 43% user testing, 7% the field study. All right, so let's get into the types of user research. The key with this work is to capture stories and bring those stories into your work, into your team. Now, those of you that are familiar with the origins of extreme programming or Agile and the Agile manifesto from 2000, the whole point of Agile was to create customer-centric software, not necessarily user-centered design or human-centered design, though maybe somehow they knew about that and they knew it was a good thing, and that was good. But that's why we have stories in Agile. We have a user story. The problem is, where do you get the stories from? You know, where does that come from? You know, is it coming from internal? Is it coming from a product owner or product manager? Is it coming from a developer or business analyst? But what is the pain? Is it fake empathy? And that's why the empathy haters will say, you see, that's why empathy is bad, because you use fake empathy. You thought you just thought you would understand. You just thought you could, you know, like as if it's a TV show, you can say, oh, I wonder why that character, I wonder if this happened or that happened. And you know, when you guess on those TV shows, those cop shows and murder things, and like, I don't know, 75% of the time you're wrong. You know, if it's a good one, maybe 90% of the time, but a large percentage of the time you're wrong about what you think is going on, right? Because just because you mentalize doesn't mean it's right. Just because you think your user pain is such doesn't mean it's such, right? So the source of that is very important. And you know, just again in summary, where UXR comes in handy is getting that evidence, that validation for those UX requirements, and also smashing those assumptions, because most stories that Agile teams create are assumption based. They're fake. You know, as a user, I would, you know, push this button. As a user, I would, you know, do this or do that. And it's more powerful if you actually take those stories from the real life of your users. So doing user research, you can increase your empathy, you can understand the context of use, and it applies to user testing as well to a degree, because then you can understand with this UI, the user was confused, the user wasn't able to find it. Maybe you can step back, take a step back. That's the courageous, you know, the hero's journey of UXR is to take the step back and to say, why is the user struggling? What are they even trying to do? Is this the right UI? Do we have the right UI? Is this the right button? Is this the right thing? Are we solving the right problem? Right. So it's how we get to undetected innovation, and journey mapping should come from field research as well. It's how we get to new UX strategy and create personas that are data driven. and figure out what's going on, figure out what's going on with our content or our conversion rates or our engagement, adoption, and so forth. It's also, I think, how we validate new or existing business models or MVPs. Too many MVPs follow user stories. They're just based on dev priorities. When you do a backlog review in Agile, it should include the perspective and context of field research and real pain. It should be injected with the priorities, aka empathy. I call them empathy capsules, like it's a capsule of, a story that you've captured, and then you can, inject it, or, and I don't know why I use these medical metaphors, but an empathy capsule that you can swallow, it's like the blue pill, red pill or something. You can swallow this empathy capsule, and it can help you become a better decider. The real issue in organizations with this topic is there's a difference between quantitative and qualitative. Most of the world is worshiping statistics, how many, how severe, and so forth, spreadsheets, in other words. There's nothing wrong with that. Why do we do that? It's because we had the scientific revolution, basically, and we were trying to get away from whispers or gossip or assumptions or pre-scientific thinking. So science and this whole scientific revolution is like, it's just about tangibility with quantifiability and numbers. And there's nothing wrong with that. In fact, UX should use quantitative research when it comes to measurement, when it comes to ROI, when it comes to proving the value of UX design, when it comes to proving the value of UXR, when it comes to proving the value of user research. You need that. You have to have that. It's part of ROI of UX. It's part of your defending UX. It's part, it's not just about saying, guys, we can activate empathy. We can all get some empathy. Now we know it's a real thing, and we just have to do it. We have to get the pain. Once we get the pain, the smart organizations will allow the pain discovery, feel the pain, and go, wow, and make decisions based on the feeling of the pain. Those are the emotionally intelligent organizations and the emotionally intelligent designers. So it really is about increasing your emotional intelligence, your design, your DEQ, design emotional intelligence quotient. It's like IQ, but EQ, right? Maybe you've heard that. There's a whole field of emotional intelligence. Now we're into 25 years of emotional intelligence research. And it's considered a skill, like a personal skill and a team skill, but it should also be considered a designer skill. The way that you make a smart designer is by allowing, if you're a manager or an organization, or if you're a designer or researcher, is to really clearly explain the business value, like I've been doing here, of user research, and showing why it's so essential to UX. That's why I started with the definition. It wasn't to bore you with definitions, but to say, as you're defining UX, you're not doing UX if there's no you, right? And if user, right? And if there's no user, if there's only user testing, you're only doing half of research. So you're only doing half of UXR, user research, if you're only testing. So clear up your definition and be clear about this is not something I invented. This is core to human-centered design, to ISO standard, to industry best practice. And you'll see organizations, companies that are advanced with UX and that have a high degree of what we call UX maturity, that they do strong user research. I just interviewed a UX director in Switzerland earlier this week, who came in. The organization wasn't very strong. She was actually a former UX researcher at Google, and she came in as a UX director and with a team of like 8-10 people, and they decided to hire more UX researchers than UX designers, which is very rare. As only someone that has the information that I'm presenting to you, that understands deeply that the party is over in the qual, in identifying the problem. And it turns out in her organization, they're having a lot of success. Her team is very healthy, and it's because they go back to the initial field study that they did. They keep going back to that. And the other thing that they do is they organize their teams around journey, a stage of journey. So instead of organizing the teams around the way the organization thinks, product, marketing, dev, technology, and UX. They organize around the stage of the journey, and then the UX and the teams kind of come around that. Very interesting and very successful in terms of best practice. Yeah, so qualitative research, getting comfortable with insights research is really, really critical. And this, trying to be funny here, having to believe users while being bound by statistical thinking, counter logic, right? So this is the problem, is that many managers and many people try to think quantitatively and to understand user pain points, and it's just not very easy to do that. You have to use qualitative research techniques. That's not a focus group. It's not real. It's a survey is a quantitative technique. A focus group is a market research technique. So it's important that you use the right techniques. In our case, it's behavioral or context research, right? I'll talk more about the techniques in just a moment. So the way to get past that organizational problem of quant versus qual culture, I used to think it's another fight, right? What's better, quant or qual, right? So UX people say qual is better, obviously, and then they just crash horns with the quant, thinkers. But there's no point really doing that. Both types of research have their own value. It's a little bit like genetics versus epigenetics, or nature versus nurture. If you talk to the leading zoologists, there is no battle between nature versus nurture. There is no it's both of them. Both points of view are needed because they're both complementary. Genetics and epigenetics go hand in hand. It turns out, though, that we know, actually, just to follow that, if you're following that nature versus nurture, it is nature, it is the environment that activates the genetic potentiality of things like cancer. In the same way, with user research, it is qualitative or field research that activates the understanding in order for you to design the genetics or the UI, right? It's the only way to do it. And you can blend the techniques. So you can do surveys as well as field studies. I've also done focus groups as well as user interviews, like one-on-one, deep dive interviews, context interviews. And I've seen a complete difference in the data. I also regularly do this since I discovered blending. And the power of it, because the people that need the numbers, they're like hungry, like, whoa, they'll feel like if they take a bite from what you give them quant, even though qual is rich, they just think like, there's nothing qual. It's just a bunch of stories and emotions and all this understanding of users and their lives of what is this, and they won't feel satisfied. So if they have the numbers, if they have the statistically significant, hundreds of users or thousands of users, and it's also nice to compare. It's different types of data. There is no competition. Remember, you need both sides of UX, so you need testing as well as field research. But you can make a better meal by blending. So field studies, they're actually, it's a shorthand for ethnographic field studies. Ethnographos, it's a Greek word that means culture study. And it's their culture, their behavior, their habits, their expectations, right? And theirs, not yours. In other words, outside in design approach, not inside out, not assumption, not led by assumption, but led by insight, right? Led by insight, not assumption, but insight. And the three techniques, three key ethnography techniques. Now, ethnography comes from anthropology, right? It's a technique that was developed in the late 1700s, 1800s, really in the late 1800s. And originally it was fairly racist. It was, British anthropologists going to the natives and examining the natives and sort of creating difference and saying, oh, yes, you can see, why racial superiority is required here. That changed, and there was a shaking up of that field. And then you had these anthropologists like Margaret Mead, that very famously went and lived with the communities. And ethnography took on the role of, in this colonial period, it took on the role of actually helping understand communities instead of, putting divides and using understanding to create divide or to create difference. And it's the same thing as like, take down the wall in your company, in your organization, and the work that you do. Take down the wall, take down the divide, start to understand by living with, the native environment, not natives, but native environment, these users. Shadowing, it's a little harder with COVID, but what you can do is use an unstructured interview and a diary study. And what we do at Experience Dynamics, we blend those two, like the diary study with the unstructured interview. So you do just like a 30-minute unstructured interview online, then you leave the user, you give them directions for the diary, you leave them for 30 days, 15 days. 30 days is a very long one. 15 days, 7 days is a fairly short one. 3 days is a super short one. But 7 to 14 days with a diary, and essentially you're giving them like almost like surveys, but like more conversational based on their context. Every 3 days, for example, over 4 touch points, which is 2 weeks, right? And you're in touch with them, so you have that contextual. You can text them, you can talk to them, you can call them. I was doing moderating a diary, and there was a user had a problem. He was like malware, actually, and I ended up helping him and saying no, because I asked him to test out an app, and the malware happened right when he tested out the app. It was no connection to the app. The app was actually like, it was Norton antivirus. It was a Norton product, which is a top antivirus. But I ended up spending 45 minutes on the phone, and he started telling me all these other things that had happened to him and that he didn't know about, and blah, blah, blah. And so with a diary study, we have what we call an incident report, like a ticket. And so we have the user submit an incident report when something happens during those 3 days in between each like diary. So it's a rich capture, actually. A diary study, it's an underutilized technique, but especially with COVID and online research, it's the way to scale that. And I'll talk about that in just a moment. But, back on like assumptions and the culture of assumptions, Margaret Mead had this great quote that said, it's not what people do, it's not even what they think they do or say they do, but it's what they actually do, right? This type of persona is not very helpful. Again, back to garbage use of techniques, right? And many of these templates that you get, these free templates, are not your friend. The one I showed you before of the 4 squares, that was like pain points, motivations, behaviors, that's much more helpful. The personality, like that's not, personality doesn't factor in. There are so many different types of personality instruments and tools, and that research is only fairly new, actually, even though it's been going on for 60, 70 years or 100 years. And this is obviously Myers-Briggs, but it's not that useful. Motivation, sure, but these are like emotions more than motivations. I don't know, this is very weak. Some bullet dots of their actual motivations would be better, such as, she wants to get in control of her finances. She's going to buy a house. She just lost her job, and so she wants to make sure she is employed so that she can continue to save. She's not sure which savings account to get. Things like that are much more valuable. She goes to the gym and fun classes, and I'm not sure. Social Sarah, this doesn't, and then we have a blank icon. You can see why people hate personas. It's a little bit like empathy. You can see why people attack empathy, the empathy haters, as I call them. You can see why they attack, because, yeah, sure. If it makes you mad to see something not used properly, it's like the sewing machine that just sat there. It kind of made me mad that my daughter didn't use it, or that I couldn't use it, or I couldn't show her. but it doesn't mean that the sewing machine was to blame or that the existence of a sewing machine is a problem. It's how you use it and how you learn to use it that is more important. You know, if you start doing field research to inform your personas and your user stories, you learn about not just context, but their task flows, their workflows, their wants and needs. Values are actually listed as one of the key e-commerce drivers now. And there's, I think I'm tracking 3 different studies where values are you know, like, in other words, connecting to customer values, understanding customer values. So yeah, understanding the whys, it is important, but just like Tim Brown said, that's not the point. That's just something you touch on the way. It's the empathy capsule you swallow on the way to making a better decision, because now you have the data, not just the feeling, not just the empathy, but the data to actually say, oh yeah, look at, you know, like the actual, I'll show you some data from a field study in a minute. The other thing about context research is you get emotion triggers, memory triggers, and unspoken needs. And these things I call artifacts, like the things that reveal problem solving, we call them artifacts. You know, artifacts are just like tools, and they might just be an insight because they're not just physical things, they're cognitive, social, emotional as well. And all the things I capture in a field study, I just call them artifacts, you know, because they're helpful design aids to understanding. This is an insight or artifact from a field study in Italy. And the insight here was that this doctor practitioner didn't want their patients waiting, right? So we were designing an experience for use in Italy and trying to understand, you know, so we also noticed getting the train tickets that it takes like 3 or 4 minutes. You have to wait. For some reason, it's just a long time. And they actually had a machine that's called biglietti veloce, fast tickets. Like, why would you have a fast ticket machine? It's because the regular human is slow. I don't know why they're so slow at the machine, or just taking their time, and, you know, whatever reason. But an observation about time, because our device and our service was sitting inside of this context, right? This is on the way out. We noticed they told us, no, this is a Center for Oriental Medicine in Milan, and they told us that just clear that. Glad you found the drawing tool, someone. It's another thing I need to disable. Okay, figure out how to manage. So they told us no computers, that they don't actually use computers, and but on the way out, I spotted this laptop. So I took a sneaky picture. You see it's blurry because I was walking. And the point here isn't just that I saw the laptop, like, aha, I caught you with a laptop, you know, or I caught you drawing on my live screen, or whatever. That's not the point. The point is that there's a sensitivity about technology in this natural medicine environment, in this environment of giving care with a natural holistic practitioner. There's a sensitivity. So the introduction of a computer-based tool might be, we have to be very careful if and when we force the practitioner to use a computer, because they don't feel like it's valuable, right? I wanted to share with you, I wanted to ask you which design is better here. So time, we're coming up to Q&A, but let's just take a quick exercise. Which of these designs is better, A or B? And I'll throw up a poll just since we're here with a poll. Let's see, which design is better? So you can tell me by poll, and if you're watching this later, you can decide in your own mind. The square one, or the A or B? I'll put up B now. I think you should be able to, let me see if I can move this. Okay, there's A, there's B. Okay. And it looks like So again, A is that one, B is that one. I'll close the poll. There's a few people that are not awake there, so wake up and join the webinar if you're live. The results are this first one, 67%. The real question isn't which is better, actually. The question is which one supports, whoops, I'm clicking too quickly, too many windows here. Which one supports the context of use better is what we should be asking, right? And if we look at these two, right? If we look at, let me just get rid of the poll here for the live. If we look at these two, which one supports so what's the context to use? Well, when there was traveling more often, you know, these days or during COVID days, you don't see much traveling happening, but so tricky if you're designing an experience like this, right? But what you're designing for is a hurried multitasking. What's the context? The user is distracted. They're overwhelmed by an environment. They're supposed to go somewhere really quickly. So they have to be somewhere. You have to be at this gate. They don't know how far they have to walk. Some airports tell you it's a 15, 20-minute walk. Some airports don't. You're not familiar with this environment. You're not familiar maybe with travel. You're not familiar with like what you're supposed to do, where you're supposed to go. The one on the left, as 75% I think people have said is better, it obviously looks better, but that's a visual design trick. So it's cleaner, it's flatter, right? And at first glance, it looks like a better design. But maybe we shouldn't be asking that question because that's a question down at the UI or that visual design level, right? We don't know like what's the context that we're supporting. The one on the right, okay, it's more clutter. There's tiny little fonts everywhere. But look at what's big and bold: seat number, gate number, go to gate, and seat. Looks like seat number. Yeah, seat number again. Seat number reproduced 2 times, and gate number is large. On this one, everything is the same size. The context of use is where should I go quickly, usually distracted, under duress. The other question is where should I sit because now I'm on the plane, I have my bags, and oh, where am I supposed to go again, right? Quickly with distractions. And you know, maybe there's a case to be said about the large prioritized fonts or text, like large font case. Maybe the little stuff that you already know, the date, you know, maybe you have to check the flight or the time, but maybe that stuff could sit over here. Maybe the irrelevant stuff like this, I barely even saw this countdown because it's a -01, which is a weird way to represent time. I mean, if you're going to do a time countdown, you might as well put it up in the corner or something so someone can have a quick glance. But maybe this irrelevant stuff can be over here, and then in big letters over in another square is this important stuff with much larger font, you know, just like you see it over here. So I would maybe even argue that the one on the right is slightly more functional, supportive of the context. Of course, the one on the left is beautiful and flat and sexy, and it even has, you know, to fool you even more, it's even got the background there of this nice red color, right, versus this one. But that's how we make decisions. We get fooled. What's a better design? Instead, we should back up and ask what supports the context of use better. We need to spend more time over here in the problem space, you know, than in the solution space, right? And with user research, we typically go to testing those designs instead of backing up and seeing if we can actually support the context of use. If you travel a lot, as I have, it's a real thing to have the panic to look at the boarding pass and to not see, like the same way when users are on the web and they don't read, right? It's like that times 100 because you're in a physical space, you've got your bags, you've got other things in your hand, you've got, you know, you're overloaded, like physically and cognitively and maybe emotionally. Maybe you're running, maybe you didn't know, you've got the COVID, now you got the mask, you got your hand sanitizer in your hands now, you've got And so now, maybe there are some countries that are designing the so-called vaccination passports. What's that going to be? A big green check, or a big red X or something like that? Or what's the design of that look like with all the other data and information? But if you can't get to the airport to test it, then what you want to do is simulate hurriedness. What's something that forces you to be somewhere very quickly? So maybe there's a queuing system that you can get in a queue. Maybe it's a rushed queue or a hurried queue, or you maybe can just go to the supermarket, and someone can call you and say, please come over here, please come over there, and you can do your shopping, but you can stop and rush and take different prototypes of a boarding pass and then test them. So that would be a good way to simulate that cognition, simulate that experience of distraction, hurriedness, right? And see which one is more glanceable, which one gets the glance better, This is from a field study we did with icebreakers, merino wool. It's a performance wool. And we kind of mapped this life cycle of someone starts out with these synthetics, and they try some merino, they fall in love with it, and they only wear icebreaker, and then they live with it. Since I've done this field study, I'm kind of over here, actually. It's one of the only products of all the thousands of products I've evaluated that I just really love. Just on a personal note, not an endorsement, but when we talked to users, they were very particular about the quality and the seams, and for chafing, for rubbing on their skin, for doing performance things. We also found that people use it for traveling or just for living in, these insights went directly into the redesign of the e-commerce site, and we saw a 300% increase in revenue in their business. They launched to, I think, 27 countries as part of this redesign. And really put them on a strong footing in terms of their e-commerce strategy. The site today, this is a few years ago, the site is still intact with this stuff. This one was interesting. We saw a competitor using this wallpaper of a seam just the seam itself was visible on the wallpaper of their e-commerce website, which just shows you how smart the competitor, or how clued in the competitor was to this particular issue. Now, a lot of people complain, the empathy complaint is like, interviews, are they good or bad? Interviews. And I've seen people arguing or fighting about the goodness of interviews. And I'm like, what's this about? And the problem is, if you just interview your user, and if you interview them poorly, if you ask them only close-ended questions, do you like this? Is this good? Is this bad? And you don't ask them open-ended questions like, what are you trying to do? Why are you trying to do that? Why is that important? What do you do next? What does a typical day look like? How do you do that? Show me how you do that. And then if you don't do those things and watch them, like actually leave that in your interview, leave space and time, then it could just be more like a survey. So this is the attack on interviews, is because they're being used as surveys. And of course that's bad, right? It's better that you are observing. Now, the diary study can help you because it can allow some time to explore, 1 week, 2 weeks, and it can give you the chance to, you can have your user do things, and you can then ask, get their feedback as they do them, and you can kind of observe remotely like that as you moderate those diary sessions. Just don't focus group it, or turn it into a survey, basically. But yes, otherwise, user interviews, there shouldn't be anything wrong with a user interview, as long as it's open. You're not forcing, but you're just hanging out, like listening. I like the user interviews where I say nothing. I just come on the interview, and they sometimes users know exactly what they start talking to me and telling me, and I'm like, wow, like I just like sit and listen and take notes. And those are the best ones, not to just constantly asking, constantly interrupting, constantly with an agenda, constantly steering the user, constantly. That kind of agenda-driven interviewing is horrible. It's gonna give you bad data. It's better if you just allow organic, non-linear. That's what the unstructured is. If the user starts talking about this issue, expand on it and use it to jump to another question you may have, but stay with their flow. Let them lead. Let them lead. You're not the leader when you're listening. You're just the receiver of their data. This is, if you can get out and observe, it's better. Like I observed this user. You can ask them to take a picture of their workspace, or if it's a B2B study like this, I asked them to take a picture. And this is a timeline. The user needed a reminder of when things happen, because the applications that he was processing were dependent on time. And then, work around spreadsheets like this one can be very helpful. What is that? Why do you use that? So you can do a screen share. You can give your users control. You can have them show you. They'll start showing you things like, oh, this is my spreadsheet where I keep this. Or we have a client with software that the users actually built the entire product in one user, just one guy. He built the entire product in a spreadsheet because he didn't trust the software. He was afraid if he was going to be audited, he should just do all the calculations himself. So he literally built this like major macro crazy thing. To be clear though, the key with interviews is observation where possible, so it's this co-discovery, and that's where the empathy transfer is. Like, so I said to this user, why do you have these? And he said, well, it helps me keep track of my workflow. Well, guess what we built into the UI? Job queue, like workflow management, right? To help the user with, what stage the thing is at. So in B2B studies, taking a picture of their cube, of their workspace, very helpful. This is what our personas look like. So this is from a field study that was taken from interviews with users. A scenario, maybe a little bit about who the audience, is, how long they've been active. What I've been doing in the last 5 or 6 years is building these based on verbatim, like actual, like say like 98% of everything the user said from multiple users. So it's a persona is a composite. It's a composite role, right? So this is a role. It's a modern rancher, but it's like kind of a segment, but we try and make these as role-based as possible, cataloging their motivations, tasks, likes, dislikes, and then insights and considerations. This field study was completed before the COVID. That's why you see it in person. And it's for a farm store. They had a 10 times increase in revenue 4 months after launching, relaunching their e-commerce website. This was with like 30 users. We're just literally hanging out in their backyard. These are some of the things we captured, some of the insights, some of the artifacts. We noticed that people like this website for their pets, and that they offered this box, this kind of box that people could subscribe to, $22 a month. So people liked that. They liked getting a regular like treats box or whatever for their pet. We noticed that e-commerce by phone was popular with younger people, but by app was popular by women, and by desktop for big purchases, like if it's requiring a lot of thinking. So that's a contextual understanding across device type, or channel, if you will. And there's an e-commerce parcel that was just delivered the day of the interview. Now you can ask users to do the same thing with a remote diary study. You can ask them to take pictures of, their living room, or of anything related to, for example, if it's e-commerce, receiving the parcel, opening the parcel, using the item inside, returning it. Like, have them take pictures or screenshots of anything that's significant in these incident logs. We noticed that they like these kits. This was a perfect way to package these things. We also looked at the Facebook groups. We joined some of their Facebook groups, and we could see what was important to them. They were actually asking for help with products. So you can do what we call virtual ethnography. Facebook groups are a great place to learn your users' Facebook groups, as well as, if it's e-commerce, product reviews, and blogs and industry leaders, that comment and that shape people's thoughts and opinions, especially around like technology experiences or something like that. But you can learn a lot from super influencers on social media, because they have so many fans and they can influence. So that's what we call virtual ethnography. Can also be useful. A lack of user research turns out to be the biggest fail. So just to look at process, this is our experience dynamics process. Prioritize your users. Remember, you're going for like 15. conduct the interviews, develop the personas from that, and then you create the UI. And we talked about user interviews. Just to look at this from a quant qual perspective, up here in this top corner is what we normally do, the unstructured interviews, sometimes a group interview if we have many users. But be careful, it's not a focus group. A focus group is over here. The most value is going to come from this top right square here or over here in this quadrant here. You might use role-playing or participatory design or co-design, so-called co-design techniques. The diary study is down here as well. That's helpful. The reason it's over here and it's not like up here is because a lot of people don't use diary studies correctly. What I mean by that is the diary study is a self-report. So it's a problem like a survey in the sense that you didn't observe it. The user told you what was going on. And so, well, we correct that by mixing it so it actually sits like more like up here. We mix it with an unstructured interview and then also do an exit interview as well. And then remember Quant Qual blending, so we'll also include like a user research survey as well. So you can along here, and all the way up here, like, is fine. Of course, other things you might do a phone interview, if it's short, you don't have time, it's an emergency. Don't make that your practice though. Your practice of building emotionally intelligent design should come from doing as much observation and interviewing as you can. So when you interview, right, so you set aside your personal biases, make sure that you have no agenda, like I talked about some of the agenda stuff. You're showing respect, caring for your users, politeness. And the thing I was saying about letting them lead, I think falls into this. Instead of you like leading, letting them listen fully with, full body listening is a technique where you just, instead of assuming, right? Because you can go and do this research and then assume and bring your assumption machine, your dirty assumption machine there, and come back with dirty data, dirty assumption, dirty data. So important that you're fully present, that you're using, being aware of your body language, and being direct and specific with questions. The more you do it, the better you'll get at it. So that's the key. And the thing is, you just want to be like the Zen beginner's mind is allow the ambiguity. Of ambiguity, just you don't know, right? So that's how you cure assumption, is you are open to not knowing. Don't just jump to conclusions. That's how we think. We think by jumping to conclusions, us humans, and we chunk things, we base things on past experience. We're actually closed-minded by nature because we're more efficient the way we think. It's just the way our brains work. And we're also not objective. Objectivity is a myth, right? We're completely subjective. You just need to look at the news. There's no such thing as objectivity. And the news reporters these days, with so many agendas to balance, they try and keep objective as possible, but clearly they're struggling to maintain that illusion of objectivity. So just listen and soak it up, observe. And these are some of the things we note: the coping systems, flow of information, the social environment, the task frequency, the breakpoints, priorities, artifacts, and metaphors, for example. These interviews should just be like thanking the user, greeting them, telling them why you're doing this, getting in rapport. So again, letting them lead, being respectful and polite of them, observing their tasks. So how do you do that? Show me, yeah, just show me, or give them control of the screen if you're doing it virtually, and probing for specific questions, but do it in an artful way that they don't know. Don't storm in there with your product agenda. Remember, you're just trying to learn. You're trying to hang out, if you will. But obviously, you want to know about a topic, an activity that you're studying, and then closing, thanking them. So I mentioned closed versus open-ended questions. This is a classic technique. You want to be using as many open-ended questions as possible. Closed is just yes, no is the answer to it. Is this, do you, can you? these are not useful because they don't open the conversation. What you want instead is what's in this wheel down here, how, why, give, tell, describe, that kind of thing. All right, so we're coming close to the end here, but I want to talk about scaling user research. And I conclude with a diary study, but first to say that if you just interview internal users, like stakeholders internally or internal staff members, that's not real, right? You have to understand that that's like biased. So it's more like getting into context. Virtually, you can do an interview in their living room, understanding your users in context, and also bringing them to your office, like having them come to your office and sitting with you is not context research. That's what we do for user testing sometimes, but it's not in their environment. They might show you, like I had, this guy pull out, let me show you these notes I'm taking for my decision, and taking those. With COVID and with doing this online, it's possible to do this. And like I was sharing, diary studies and a Zoom interview can be helpful. Remember the two sides. So it's not just user testing, though you can blend these two. You want to do a field study to understand what the problem is you're trying to solve, right? Problem space. And then you test it later, right? Typically. But you might blend these two. So you might start out with an unstructured interview for half an hour and then have them go through the site or mobile app or whatever and test. So you can blend also these two in one setting. The main thing is to understand the problem they're trying to solve, and then maybe as well the current state of the app or the design, right? To conclude with, this is a diary study. So I'm just going to go through this really quickly. So recruiting, we're looking at users. This is a privacy app. So this is what we gathered from a diary study. We interviewed them and then had them also share a total of 4 diaries over 2 weeks with screenshots and incident log reports from each user, sharing roughly 1 to 3 incident logs in each reporting period, maybe a total of half dozen for all users. We also asked them some questions about their background. These are examples of screenshots that the user sent, why they did them. So you can see that this user actually had a share from a friend on Facebook. Also, Facebook changed its privacy settings during our privacy study. And so we were able to get that reaction real time. She, by the way, she did not feel more safe from that as well. More screenshots from the users in terms of their feelings around, different apps, and they like this, and this is helpful, or it makes them feel secure. This is how they, they get this report card from Norton, for example. And then, again, sharing screenshots. So you can see that my point is, like with a diary study, you can actually gather some rich data. And one thing that we've done is we've asked users to take these kind of over the shoulder pictures, or have somebody else take them, using their device or interacting. That's not normally done, but with COVID, we changed the rules a little bit, actually ask users to take in context pictures just because they present better in a report when you see a human instead of just a screenshot. So that's just a little pro tip, getting the user in the shot themselves. More screenshots, more reasons why, more things that the users, and then over 4 weeks, we're able to see that they started out with a 49% kind of baseline feeling of safety. It goes up by the third diary. It's high, and then it sort of drops after using an app. This is like a competitor app. 2 weeks, 15 users. We noticed that in one of the apps, the competitor apps, there was a 57% failure rate as a massive issue. If this is Norton, if Norton had actually done a diary study after they launched, even, you can use this in conjunction with test. So user, field study, design the app, launch, then test, test and then launch. and then follow up with a diary study, maybe a few weeks after launch or a month after launch. So that's typically how diary studies have been used in the past, like to get after effects, like beyond, when they live with it. And it's very, very important. If Norton had done that, they may have seen that they have a huge problem with one of their apps. A huge problem. You just can't even use it. And it's the security model of the app is faulty. So these experiences like login, the way the security authenticates you, the amount of time it takes, the understanding of the report, et cetera, these things are so important for user adoption, and a diary study can help you do that. Just concluding with discussion of there are some user researchers watching this, and if you're in an organizational capacity where you're trying to scale your UXR capabilities, then you should look at research ops, design ops, or research ops. And design ops and research ops is about making this a habit that you do all the time, that it's a regular part, just like a sprint is to Agile, an insight, and we call them insight sprints now. So you can do insight sprints, but you also have your users ready. You have, the privacy GDPR or whatever, you have an ethics thing dialed in, ethics approach. You've got how to recruit. You don't have to figure that out. I mean, it sounds trivial, but it's important. You've got people on board. They understand that you need to talk to users. So it's institutionalizing, if you will, or operationalizing research, and that's all a research ops is. A little bit like with design, we use design system, right? But also regular wireframing and user testing to validate. So that's operationalizing design. But a lot of organizations use design systems. So it's a similar type of approach. It's design ops and research ops, kind of, again, a sistered approach to making sure UX is happening regularly and on time. All right, so let's go to questions. I'm going to check our chat for the folks that are live here. Thank you so much all for listening. Let me see if I've got a poll for you. Yes, final poll here. How valuable was this webinar? Extremely valuable, somewhat valuable, or not valuable to you? All right. All right, so you can unmic yourselves now if you would like. And let's go to...
Hello, Mr. Frank. Hello, it's good to see you. I am Peter. I am UI UX designer. Actually, I am on IDF, and I am enjoying my time watching your courses. It's very valuable.
Okay, great. Good to hear that. Nice to see you, Peter.
I get a question that is not so related to the seminar, but it's really crucial to me. At interview to a UX designer position, I got a task that I go through a UX series. Then when I got to the point of a persona, I kind of fake the whole persona, and it's it's in the point that when I go to the demographics and etc. It's like I'm a persona pursuiters.
Like you're a persona what? What was that?
Pursuit. I am in a persona pursuit, yani.
Oh, okay. You're in persona pursuit. Okay.
Yes. Well, how I make the perfect persona that would actually benefit the business I am in interview to it.
Yeah, so you might be interested in my UX Inner Circle. I'm actually have in a couple of weeks I'll put the link on the chat, uxinnercircle.com. I have a masterclass on getting personas and journey maps right, on doing them right. But the one of the most important things that I covered on this webinar was the source of the data. Like getting the data from the real pain points is very important. If you use market research, surveys, demographics, quantitative data, right? It's not going to tell you anything about their real stories or their real pain points, their lives, there's no deep hanging out from that data. There's nothing, you didn't hang out with the user, you didn't live with them. So it's important that the source of the data is gathered correctly. So you'll need to use ethnographic field research. Essentially, you can do online depth interview and diary study, like I suggest. Those are the most important online, doing this online with COVID, especially. And make sure you pay your user at the end of the diary study, by the way, because then they'll finish the diary study. So, and I tested that. I had one woman saying, "Oh, it's my son's birthday, and I can you please just make this exception?" I said, you know what, it's the COVID, people need money. And then guess what? She disappeared. She didn't finish the diary. But I went and found her. And I said, look, I trusted you, and you're going to ruin my data for my client. You better go finish this right now. And so she's, okay, sorry. So she did try to run away. So source of the data is important. The second thing is, don't think about it like demographic, but more psychographic. Psychographics are more like their motivations, their behaviors, their roles. Ultimately, and this is the third thing, is create role-based personas. Role-based. What does role-based personas means? It means that the hat that the user's wearing, or a persona actually means mask. It's a Latin word for means mask. So it's a persona. It's confusing in Spanish because people that speak Spanish, it means person in Spanish. So it's very confusing for UX designers in Latin America, I know. And they're all like persona, what are you talking about? But the mask is a clue because we think of it more like a hat or the role. If you just design like a person, a segment or a demographic or this is Bob, this is Peter, this is Frank, this is Susie, this is Yasmin or something, then it's going to be much more difficult because then you're thinking about the persona as a person, and it's not a person. A persona is it's a composite. It's a combination of different behaviors that represent a role. In other words, problem-solving Peter was one of my personas. Quick fix Frank, problem-solving Peter. He wants to solve a problem. He's so driven that he wants to make sure his bank account has all the best features and has all the best whatever. Quick fix Frank, he's just looking for a quick fix. He's careless. He doesn't care. He just wants to get his UX design done, and he doesn't do user research. He's quick fix Frank. So it tells you more if you use a role-based approach. Two personas.
A way to solve the problem, right?
Yeah, the problem they're trying to solve, and then call them the name. So like quick fix Frank or tech specs Tina was one of my personas. Tech specs Tina. What was another one? Was duplicate Debbie. It was a B2B persona. She was many of the users, many of them, like when I say like probably 70-80% complained about duplicates, spending a lot of time looking at duplicates. And so one of the personas, duplicate Debbie. The other thing, if you use this role-based approach, which we'll learn at the UX Inner Circle, and I have a few passes if anyone would like to join, if you really need to learn this information and you can't pay for it, let me know and I can give you a complimentary pass. If you're watching this later and it's past, then you should join the UX Inner Circle. You can get that recording as well as many others. But the the role-based approach, the composite approach, will also help with too many personas. Because another problem people have is they end up with like 30 personas, 50 personas, even 20 or 15 personas. My personas usually end up with like 4, 6, 8, and it's not that I choose that number. I let the data speak to me, and I'm constantly seeing where I can, if the persona sticks, is this a dominant, is duplicate problem solving, is it a common thing? Is quick fix Frank, is that like common? Is everybody doing quick fix, or is it only like an edge case? If it's only, okay, maybe it is an edge case, but I want to call attention to this because it's a big issue for the product manager right now. And there's no feature for fixing quick fix or whatever. So maybe I'm going to include it in there, but I include it as a secondary persona, not a primary. And that's another thing, is you can weight the personas. Primary, these are like, why primary compared to the business objectives, right? So, so that you prioritize your personas. Now, Microsoft even has a tool that they created for weighting personas, so you have like 80% of the priority to this persona, 20% to this other one. So problem solving Peter, he gets 80%, quick fix Frank gets 20%, and then we can see what's important to them both. They both have problems with duplicates. Okay, that kind of thing. So there are different ways that you can prioritize, but the role-based persona is the only way to go. Everything else will get you in the garbage department.
Thank you. I got it.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Frank.
Very welcome. All right, so it looks like 80% said it was extremely valuable and 20% said somewhat valuable. So that's good to hear. I'm happy to hear that. And let's take maybe a couple more questions here before we break off. Session's a gold mine. Thanks, UIX and Frank. Okay, glad to hear that. Any other questions before we go?
Mr. Frank, I'm Peter again.
Yes.
I have an interview that the board member asked me a few questions about my UI, my UX process, and then he got to the point when you want to evaluate your UX case, and to get to the quantified outcomes or deliverables. How would you get these deliverables, and is there a software or website that is free to use? You're gonna use it 100 times, and every time it would give you that you are getting better or something.
Okay. By the way, I just put 2 links on the chat to 5 persona distinctions, how to use personas properly, and then also your personas are garbage without good user research, which you can Google those 2 phrases if you don't have the link. Just go to the Experience Dynamics website and type personas in the search, and it should get you those blog post articles. So Peter, to summarize one more time for me what the question is again, if you would.
Okay. He want to quantify my deliverables of UX case.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So you're asking how to quantify?
Yes.
Yes. So this topic is ROI of UX. That's what you should search. You should do some more research on ROI of UX.
Is it about my ROI, or he would give me the KPIs and ROI of him?
Yeah, no, it would definitely be his, unless you're a chief experience officer or chief customer officer, or you're a very senior manager and you're deciding what the what the KPIs are. Typically, the KPIs from your organization are, and then what you'll do is, so it depends what industry. I don't know what industry you're in, but it's easier like with e-commerce because, you know, analytics will capture, you know, the conversion rates and you know, the visitors and so forth, that kind of thing. So you have some of that stuff already, but if you're doing user testing, you can capture success rate is the most important metric that we capture with user testing. So you can show that if you already have live analytics, like, you know, that's already measuring engagement and, you know, exits and conversions, then, you know, obviously that'll be the test. The field study then, so that's user testing, that's the easy one. So field study, here we've just talked about, you know, user needs and you know, emotions and context. How do you measure that? Well, that one you have to sort of wait and look at the effect that it has in the design. So you can, you know, there have been some studies like the Forrester study about 4 times return on investment with using personas in a redesign. We should say using personas correctly. But yeah, it's a little trickier to show direct quantification of the field research, but its impact on the UX design, and then, you know, you can test the UX design and see how well that does. Just because a UX design tests poorly, though, doesn't mean that the user research, it just means that poor design decisions were made. Usually when you do user research, though, you can improve the designs, and then you should have better test results, which then result in better results, you know, when you launch and so forth. But wireframing has also been studied, like doing wireframing and prototyping, you know, has been studied as a, here, I'll drop another link to, I don't know if I'm answering your question. Is this what you're asking, Peter?
Sure. Yes.
Okay.
Yes, it's not, I cannot give him an exact quantified deliverables from my UX study, but it would reflect on the analytics from the conversion and so on. Like, that's it.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I highly recommend, you know, measuring products and service like the UX. It's so important. It's important that you get the case study. It's how you build your case next time. It's important that you have that story, and it's important, you know, you don't just do this one time. This UXR, UX user research, becomes part of the process of product development, becomes so normal and so regular that you think, oh, what are users' needs? What are the product requirements? Just like, you know, now we go to the BA, the business analyst, or we go to the product owner, product manager, and then they tell us what the requirements are. In an organization, especially one that's large organizations, most large organizations have like a design ops or research ops function. In those large organizations or in those mature organizations, the user research, UX research is going to be something so regular, so basic that you know, but you have to train the organization to think that way. So you need measurement for sure. Has to always be thinking about that, and encourage your organization to capture it as well.
Will it be my turn to get the analytics, or would it be the marketing team turn?
What do you mean? Like, you mean whose responsibility is it?
Yes.
Well, if the marketing team's not doing it, then maybe you can do it with them. But yeah, if nobody's doing it, then I would take the initiative and do it myself. You know, and to show, yeah, and I would also present that you know, the good thing about UX is we're not afraid of results. We're, you know, it's like, show me the money, show me the proof. It's like, if I can improve this design, if I can improve the you know, optimize or A/B test to optimize, or user test and then A/B test better, you know, do field study, get the right content, get the right call to actions, user test to make sure you design them right, then A/B test and optimize, which to me is the correct flow for A/B optimization. if you can show an improvement, then, you know, it's like, then you prove your existence, you justify. So in UX, we shouldn't be afraid of quantifying or of, in fact, we should welcome it. We should say, yes, you know, let's do it. Let's test it. Because there's only one way with most UX, there's only one way, it's up. You can't make a UX worse. I mean, come on, you know, like, you'd have to be really stupid, or, you know, you have to be doing something very bad to make a UX worse. I mean, the reason is, and the reason why I say we're not afraid is because we're testing with users. We're checking, you know, context research, problem space definition. Wow, okay, this is what we're designing. Now we're going to design it, you know, wireframe it. Now we're going to test it. And then we're going to get user feedback. Now we're going to launch it. Now we're going to optimize it. So we're always, it's always a feedback and a listening, and there's never any fear with that approach, because it's not coming from your assumptions or what you think is right, or internally, or, you know, which we know that's a very dangerous way to develop products and services. There was a question on how to reach me, frank@experiencedynamics.com, or you can reach me by LinkedIn as well. So was there any final question from anyone? Small question we wanted to ask? Thank you, Peter, for your questions. Appreciate that.
Thank you, Mr. Frank. It's an honor.
The pleasure's all mine. The honor is all mine, Peter. Thank you. All right, we'll send out a recording for this. Thank you guys so much for all your great attention and participation, and hope to see you in a future webinar and or Interaction Design Foundation course, or masterclass at the UX Inner Circle. Take care and thanks.